Thanks for joining this webinar, Spotlight on Return Material Authorizations, also known as RMA. My name is Natalie from Orchid, and today Anne and I will go through steps to get started with RMA, tips to use RMA templates, go through some frequently asked questions, and in the final part of the presentation we will go through using RMA with other Orchid modules such as Extender, in particular Workflow, Notes and Document Management Link. Most of us have had to deal with cumbersome returns experiences, and we would probably all agree that they deter us from purchasing again from the vendor, and that we're also very quick to share such stories online with colleagues and friends. At a time where online shopping is deeply ingrained in our shopping habits, the ability to return efficiently and easily is particularly important for customer satisfaction, to foster trust and loyalty. But as we discussed in a recent blog article that you can look at on the Orchid website, a robust returns process has other benefits. Brand reputation. Customers perceive companies with a good reputation for hassle-free returns as being more reliable and customer-focused. Reduced costs. While returns incur costs, a well-managed process can mitigate these expenses through lower transportation costs, restocking fees, stock write-offs, and other return-related overheads. An effective returns management provides insights into product performance and customer preferences, and this information analyzing returns is invaluable to optimize inventory levels and refine product offerings. Becoming more and more important, a well-organized returns process can also contribute to sustainability efforts, and companies can minimize the environmental footprint associated with reverse logistics. In many industries and locations, there are legal requirements and industry standards governing returns management, for example in electronics or pharmaceuticals products. And a structured returns process can help ensure compliance. Orchid's Return Material Authorizations module is the first third-party module for Sage 300 that we developed over 20 years ago and is part of our operations and inventory management suite of products. Companies who manage return and/or repair of physical products, if they have customers suffering from poor service or excessive stock write-off or unrecovered repair costs, if you have error-prone manual processes for your returns and want to implement consistent processes while being able to configure them depending on the types of return, the type of products, and manage all this within Sage 300, then you should look at the Orchid RMA module. It helps you track returns and repairs from within Sage 300. It has configurable workflows to authorize the customer return, initiate the replacement order, issue the credit note, and return faulty goods to the vendor if required. It provides a single source of truth for all information related to the returns, and therefore avoids data duplication and rekeying, as you can link your return to the original invoice or to the serial number. You have visibility of the process so customers can be kept fully informed of the status and the progress. And your inventory and financial records are kept up to date and synchronized. So thanks to these more consistent processes, while still being configurable, you can reduce stock write-offs, maximize the cost recovery, and at the same time improve customer satisfaction. Before we have a look at RMA in action and how to start using RMA in Sage 300, here are a few screenshots. You will notice that the RA entry screen looks very familiar. If you're familiar with the order entry screen, it has details about the customer and overall about the RA, like date and the ship to location. It has lines with the different items that need to be returned. There are a series of reports, including analysis by fault code, by status, as well as forms that you can send to the client to authorize the return and instructions to tell them how to return the goods. To start using RMA, you need to download RMA from the Orchid website, install the software and activate it in Sage 300. You can then enter your license details if you have purchased the software, or enter a serial number to create a 30-day trial. We will not demonstrate this today. But I'm now going to hand over to Anne to go through configuring RMA options and creating an RMA and emailing the customer.
And after activating, we should go to Admin Services, assign Visual Process Flows, and assign the RA Transactions Visual Process Flow to those users who are going to be entering RMA transactions. In the Options, on the Processing tab, you should specify your number length for RMA numbers and the prefix and the starting number that you want to start from. And there's some other configuration options, for example, how you want to integrate with serialized and lot tracking, whether you're going to use AR multiple contacts, and you can refer to the online help for more details on all these fields. Authorizations are needed for those users who are going to override template validations. The external status is used to keep track of the status according to the customer, so why it is being returned. Fault types are configurable for the types of products you're dealing with. And workflow stage can work in conjunction with your RMA process and can be configured accordingly. If you are using repair agents, we recommend you use the same repair agent code as you have for your vendors, so you can easily keep track of the RMAs and items sent to the repair agents. And you can configure optional fields at the RMA document header level, the RMA document item detail level, and the RMA document miscellaneous charge item level. And if you are wanting to integrate with the optional fields in order entry and purchase orders for the credit notes, replacement orders, and purchase orders created, then if you create the same named optional field at the same level in PO or OE, then the optional field value selected on the RMA document will flow on to the target document that's created by RMA. And if you're sending RMA remittance advices via email, you can configure email message templates to go with the RMA documents. And you can use the F1 help or the online help to get a list of the message template values you can use. The final three setup options, the templates, item policy, and customer templates, all relate to your processing rules for RMAs. Firstly, in RMA templates, you are able to specify specific processing rules that you want when you're doing returns, as opposed to repairs. And you might have different rules relating to warranty repairs. For example, on your returns, you may want to specify a specific salesperson code so that any replacement order or credit note uses the salesperson code that you are using for returns. You might want to automatically charge a restocking fee based on a miscellaneous charge code and either a fixed value on the miscellaneous charge code or a restocking fee percentage. So in this case, our restocking fee is going to be called handling charge, and it'll be 10% of the RMA. When creating target documents, where do you want to put the RMA document? on the RMA item detail lines, do you want to allow any of these status codes to be blank, or are they mandatory? And if you typically put the item on a replacement order or on a credit note, which you may do with returns, and you may have different rules for miscellaneous items. You might want to default your status and workflow stage. And you may want to make the invoice mandatory for credit notes and have your own numbering sequence. Which might be different for your warranty repairs, where you want to make the invoice required for all items, whereas your repairs you don't require a invoice number. And you can have different return instructions defaulting per template as well. With the item policies, you can specify different rules for each of the items. For example, for the office desk kit, you may not allow credit notes, you may not allow replacement orders, or you may only allow credit notes within 30 days of the date of the invoice. And finally, with your customer templates, for per customer code, you can link them to an RMA template code if appropriate. If you are using the RMA email address to email the return instruction, you can fill them in here, or if you're using the multi-contact feature of Sage 300, you would fill in the email address for RMA on the AR customer. And you can specify your default message template, which may be different per customer. But because we're using Sage multi-contacts and we've selected that option in RMA Options, we need to go to the AR customers and configure the email addresses on the Contacts tab. On the multi-contact tab on the AR customer, we can create a new contact and then configure that contact for the RMA documents as is required, and link this contact code for your RMA return authorizations or return instructions, depending which you are sending to the customer. We've now configured all the options for RMA and are in a position to go ahead and create an RMA for our customer and email the customer the return instruction. We can create our RMAs in the RA transaction menu, or we can use the visual process flow. So we're going to process a return for customer 1200. The template code defaults to returns because we set that up in the policy, but we could change that. And we have our defaulted restocking fee for the returns based on our template of returns. And we can select to return from an invoice. And the customer is returning 2 of these and 1 of these. And now if we wish to email the instruction, we can choose the customer's email destination. And there's a preview, and if we were set to email, the customer would have been emailed accordingly. In terms of processing with the RMA and working on the F9 zoom to see more of these fields, when the items are returned, we can complete that the items are returned, fill in any status codes that we may choose to work with, warranty or consumer contact information, until we're happy with this RMA. And if we agree that these 2 items are to be returned, and we're going to credit note them, we need to say whether the items are going to be returned to inventory or they're damaged items and they're going to be written off. So let's say these are okay, they're going to be returned to inventory. Similarly with the desk accessories, they're going to be returned to inventory. We can calculate the restocking fee, which is 10% of the RMA. And now we can go ahead and complete the RMA and generate the credit note. And zooming into the credit note, we see the handling fee, which is a credit amount, reducing the value of the credit note, plus the items. And now we can go ahead and run the relevant analysis reports. So this is showing us our customers with items and returns.
Thanks, Anne, for showing us how to get started with RMA. We're now going to look at RMA templates, item policies, and customer templates in more details.
RMA templates allow you to automatically apply restocking fees to your RMAs, define which exchange rate is to be used, the RMA based on the RMA date or based on the original invoice date. You can auto default fields like references, descriptions, comments, ship files. You can auto default the salesperson to be used for replacement orders and credit notes. So you could have a particular RMA salesperson to avoid people getting too much sales commission on orders which are replacement orders or for credit notes which are not relating to the salesperson. You can also automate and default item and miscellaneous charge lines preferences. For example, if you're using the RMA status or workflow stage codes, you can default them when the RMA is created to different values. And whether or not you want to put the item on a credit note or a replacement order that gets created using this template code, then you can say those defaults as well on your template. And if you're using category or location to isolate your returns, you can also default those accordingly. You can also have different RMA document number prefix ranges based on the template code, so you could keep track of your returns with a different number net range from your repairs and from your warranty repairs to easily identify what work you're doing. You can check the quantity already credited against an invoice. So if you invoice 10, you can check that you don't credit more than 10 against that invoice. And you can make an invoice mandatory on your credit notes and always match your credit notes to invoices. And these sorts of template rules can only be overwritten by authorizing users. And similarly, on the item level, we can have policies per item to not allow credits or only to allow credits within a certain number of days of the date of invoice, and or whether or not you're allowed to replace items that are sold. And again, template rules can only be overwritten by authorizing users. And for customers, you can specify a default template code under which your RMAs will be created for that customer. If you're not using the multiple contact feature in accounts receivable, you can define a specific RMA email address on their template. And you can define a default message ID for that particular customer. Let's have a look at all of this in action. Let's first look at the customer templates. When we enter an RMA for customer 1100, it's going to default to the template RET, and it's going to use this particular message ID for the email message for the return instruction and this email address. Whereas 1200 is going to default to REP for repairs with this email address and this message ID. And customer 1600 is going to default to warranty repairs with this particular email address and this particular email message template for the return instruction. So when we create an RMA for 1600, the template code is going to default to WAR. We may overwrite it, but that's going to be the default. And looking at the template codes, if we look at WAR, it defaults the description to warranty repairs. It does not have an automatic restocking fee. It uses the original document's exchange rate if we do a credit note. It has a particular salesperson called WAR, so we can keep track of credit notes and replacement orders done under the warranty template code. On the item details, we default to put the item on a replacement order because that's normally what we do. When we create a warranty repair, we replace it with a repaired or a new item at 0 charge, and the default stage is 01 with the customer. And on the RMA processing, the RMA number is going to start with WAR. We're going to match any credit note to an invoice. The invoice is required for all items under warranty repairs, and we're going to check the quantity already credited. And we could configure a specific RMA instruction for this particular template code. So when we go ahead and create an RMA for customer 1600, you can see the template code defaults, some of these description fields default, and when we select an invoice, let's select invoice 52. And once we highlight the invoice number, Document Management Link is displaying to us the original invoice. And we can double click to see what was sold to the customer on this invoice number. And we see it was 20 of these items. Assuming that they're going to be returning all 20, and if we look at the detail zoom of the lines, we can see that the template has said typically you put warranty repairs onto a replacement order at 0 value, but in this instance we're going to credit the customer. So we're going to put the item or miscellaneous charge line onto the credit note, but not at 0 value. And we're going to add the document. We get a new document number prefixed by WAR, and if that was all we were going to do for this particular one, we could go ahead and create a credit note. And the credits note's been created for 20 of this item. Now, assuming some time passes and Dan Penn tells us he's going to return these items again. And again, we're going to select that same invoice number. Now, when we key in the quantity of 20, we get an error message saying that this quantity exceeds the amount that's already been credited against this particular invoice. And if I do need to do this, I need to get an authorizing or approving RMA user to first approve this. And then I'd be able to re-add this quantity and re-credit this quantity because this RMA has been approved. And looking at the restocking fee, here on our returns template, we are automatically charging a restocking fee based on the miscellaneous charge code RET, and it's not a percentage restocking fee, whereas the RET PCT restocking fee template code is automatically charging a restocking fee using the code RET10, and it's going to be 10% of the RMA value. So checking which customers have been set up for the template code RET, we see customer 1100 has been set up for RET. So we'll create an RMA for customer 1100. And we can see the miscellaneous charge code has automatically been added. Let's select an invoice, invoice 21. And they're returning one of that item, two of that item, and perhaps invoice 36. And again returning 1 and 1. So the total cost of the RMA is at $95.56, and the restocking fee remains at $10 as per the setup of the miscellaneous charge code RET, which is different if we use the percentage restocking fee, which is defaulted the RET10 miscellaneous charge code, and this one has 0 value. It'll only be calculated once we click calculate restocking fee. So let's just get some items onto this RMA, and we're going to return 2 and 2. So the RMA is $134, and if we calculate the restocking fee, it's going to be set to $13.42. And if we add more items, $187.85, and recalculate the restocking fee, we can see it's been reset based on 10% of the existing lines. And finally, using item policies, if we look at this item for the whiteboard marker, we do not allow credit notes unless it's within 30 days of the date of invoice, and we do not allow replacement orders. So if we go ahead and create an RMA, for customer 1500 and add that item, we're not allowed replacement orders based on the item policy. So we would be unable to put the item on a replacement order. And because we haven't applied an invoice, we would not be able to put it on a credit note either, unless we apply an invoice that's within 30 days. And again, if we approve this document by an authorizing user, these item policy validations will no longer hold for this RMA.
Thanks, Anne, for this detailed presentation on using RMA templates, item policies, and customer templates. Now we're going to go through some frequently asked questions, which are all documented in the online help. We will show you some demonstrations, but it's mainly a lot of things that we have actually seen in the demonstration before, particularly on using RMA templates. Okay, so in the frequently asked questions that's available from the online help, let's look at the main ones. Can I add any items to our RA transaction? You can until you start adding item policies. We've seen some examples in the presentation before, and you can specify different return policies for different items. Some items may not be allowed on credit notes, or you're not allowed to add them on a replacement order, or you can only return an item within a certain number of days from the invoice. And you can set that up in the RA item policy. Can I apply credit notes to OE invoices, and how can I enforce this? Whether the credit note is applied to the OE invoice depends on the RMA template that you use. So if you don't want to match credit note, then you don't tick the box that says match credit note to invoice on the RA template code. If you want all credit notes to be matched, then you select both match credit note to invoice and invoice is required on all items. If you want to do both, then you create two template codes with a different with the appropriate options on each of them. Can I automatically add restocking fees in RMA? Again, we've seen this in the earlier presentation. You can do this through the RMA templates. That is the best way to do this. And the steps to add restocking fees, generally you would create your OE miscellaneous charge code, create an RMA template that adds a restocking fee, and then depending on your calculation method, it can be a percentage of the total RMA or a fixed fee. If it's a fixed fee and you use the OE miscellaneous charge code price, then you leave the percentage as 0, otherwise you enter your percentage. And then once you've created your RMA, before you click complete, you use the button to calculate the restocking fee. Can we copy line comments from RMA to associated documents? This is another option that you configure on the RMA templates on the processing tab. You have to select override RMA comments onto match credit note or copy from an RMA to an unmatched credit note. And it will copy the RMA line comments onto the related line credit note. Can we set the document date when created a credit note from RMA? Yes, you can, using the RMA template. You can set whether the credit note date will be the RMA date, the RMA completion date, or the session date at the time of creating the credit note. Can I transfer optional fields from an RA transaction to the OE or PO documents created by RMA? This is not done on the template. This is done by configuring your optional fields on the RA with the same name, type and length as the fields, the optional fields in order entry and or purchase orders. If they have the same names, then when you create the associated documents, the optional fields will be passed. When we create a PO vendor return, can RMA match the PO vendor return to the PO receipt? Yes, you can, and you do this by selecting a PO receipt on the RMA detail line under the vendor original receipt field. So here under the vendor original receipt, I can select the receipt, and if I do that, when I generate a PO return, the return will be matched. Next question is, does RMA support IC price check option? When you use price check in inventory control, you need to enter a user that is authorized to make the price adjustments onto the RMA before you create the OE credit note or the OE replacement order. When you do that, RA will use the authoriser's user ID and password and fill in the required field on the order entry document. So you create an RA user. They may be authorized to approve RA, as in to override all the template validations or not. But when you're using it just for IC price check, RA will pass those credentials to the OE credit note and OE replacement order to automatically authorize them. So yes, RA support IC price check. Does RMA support Sage 300 multiple contacts? Yes, we've shown this in the demonstration. You can email RA forms from the RA transaction screen. And if you choose the customer delivery method, and the customer's delivery method is set to multiple contacts, then RA will email the forms to all the contacts that have been selected as RA on multiple contact. Does RMA support Sage 300 number change modules? Vendor number change, customer number change, and item number change? Yes, they do, as long as number change and RA are installed on the same programs and shared data. And we have a knowledge base article in case particularly with some older versions of RA. If you have any issues, get in touch with us. Does RMA support Sage 300 project and job costing? Yes, it does. But if you select job related on the RA document, you also need to select it on the related customer invoice. And when you're creating documents from RA, the same details can go on either an order entry credit note or a purchase order return, not on both, for job-related documents. How can I override RMA validations? We've seen how RMA templates let us control the conditions under which we can do a return. Does the item need to be on an invoice? Can I credit more items than were initially sold, less credits? Am I within the number of days after the invoice I can still do the credit note? If I need to override any of these validations for whatever reason, then the RMA needs to be approved by an authorizing user. And we've seen an example of this in the presentation. The steps are summarized in this topic, and that is an example of return using an RA authorization to return components of a kit. If your template has invoice required on all items selected, you can add the kit to the RA because it does have an invoice number, but the specific component within a kit does not have a related invoice number. So this is an example where you will need to approve the RA before you can add the component to the RA. How can we print OE and PO documents created by RA? When we create associated documents, the details of the last credit note or replacement order or PO return documents are displayed on the RMA header. The details are stored on each line. Let's look at this. So in this example, I haven't created a credit note yet, but I have created a replacement order. I can drill down to the order from there and print it using the standard OE method. I can use the detail zoom to open the F9 screen, and if I go here on the integration tab, I can see the order number, and if I had created credit note or vendor return, and from here I can print those documents. And that opens the standard print order confirmation screen. Can I set default RMA values per customer? And we have seen that you do this by setting up an RMA customer template. So under RMA setup, customer templates, I can select a customer, choose a default template code for this customer, which can be different from the template code set in RMA Options. default a description for the RMA and set some email addresses and a default message ID. How do I amend an RA line after completing the RMA? Question that we often get in support is, once I have an RMA that is completed, I've tried to create a credit note and maybe didn't create the credit note. The most common reason would be that the put item on the credit note is not selected for this line. So to do this, I need to uncomplete my RA if the line are completed. Then on the F9, come here, select the box to put the item on the credit note, save this, complete the RA again, and then I can create a credit note. Now let's look at using RMA with other Orchid modules such as Extender and Information Manager, specifically Notes and Document Management Link. While RMA helps automate the returns process, Notes and Document Management Link help provide transparency in the business, where notes and documents can be shared among all team members that process returns and deal with the customer. Extender is used to control the approval workflow. In our example, Sue enters the return in Orchid RMA in Sage 300. Using Notes and Document Management Link, she will find the email received from the customer and add a note. When the client returns the goods, the RMA is marked complete, which starts the workflow. In our example, we've configured Extender Workflow to assign the return to the QA inspector, who will review the stock before handing over to accounts for the final approval. Accounts can then approve the return, the RMA, to complete it and create the replacement order and/or the credit note as required. Let's now have a look in Sage 300. I'm logged into Sage 300 as Susan, and I receive an email from a customer that they want to return a good because the wrong color was sent. So I'm going to go into RMA and select Mr. Ronald Black, our customer. In the email he mentioned he attaches the invoice, so I know that it's come from invoice 004, which I can see here. So I'm just going to quickly add that RMA. And as you can see, we've configured Document Management Link to display some documents relevant to the RMA here, and we haven't entered any yet, and also to the original invoice, the documents relevant to Mr. Ronald Black. I've selected invoice 04, I can see the document here, and if I need to, I can double click on that document and open it. So he's only returning this one item, so I'm going to use F9 to open the screen, return one, and it is going to go on the replacement order because they want it in a different color. Save this. So now I can print my RA instruction. And in this example, I'm going to save my RA to the network folder that I've configured in DML. And I've configured it to create one folder per RA. So now if I refresh my tray, I can see that the RA instruction has been filed in Document Management Link. Exploring, I can see this document here. I might also want to add the original email from Mr. Ronald Black. And to do this, I'm going to go to my scan document, and this is the email that I have saved previously, and it gets renamed and attached into that particular folder. Sue can now add a note to that return. In the bronze color. So now I can see that I've got my note, I've got my documents relating to the original invoice, and I've got the document specific to the RMA. So a couple of days passed, and Susan now receives the goods from Mr. Ronald Black. So the RMA is now ready to be completed. So when she clicks complete, that will then start the workflow configured in Extender. Get a little message telling us that the workflow needs approval before it's completed, and this message is configurable. The fact that you get a message is also configurable in Extender workflow. So I close this, I don't need to print it. Next step, we've configured our workflow to assign the return to the QA inspection. So I'm going to log on as the QA user. Then open the workflow console, and I'm seeing that this return was started by Susan, return 21. I can check some values that might have been entered in the workflow, like it's customer 1200 Ronald Black. I know it's waiting for the inspection. I can drill down to either the customer activity or the customer, and also to the actual RMA. So I'm going to open it from here. And logged in as the QA user, I see the same documents, so that they have access to the notes as well. And now you can see that they have access to the notes. So it is your choice in the configuration who can view what notes and what documents. So the QA user reviews the inspects the items, reviews the RMA, can amend the RMA as if required. And when they're done, they can click the inspect button to confirm that the inspection has been completed. The workflow has been configured that they need to enter a comment. So that all packaging was included and it can go back to stock. As that happens, the workflow now drops off my console because I've done my job as a QA user. But if I look at all workflow, I can see that now my RA21 has been allocated to accounts. So what I need to do is log in as Steve, who's part of the accounts team. And Steve can then look at the workflow console and sees RA21 waiting for approval. You can filter by colors if he only wants to see the RAs. And from here, similarly, he can choose to drill down to the actual RA. And like the other users, he will have access to the documents. He can check the original invoice and he can see the note. He could also enter his own note. So it's okay to send a replacement order as their account is current. And then from here, you can then could reject the next phase of the returns, or he can approve it and say, okay, to send a new order. Actually, I'm going to cancel this. Show you one thing, that as he's looking at the workflow console in the values, he can see the inspection comment in here, that it's okay to return the item to stock, etc. So now I'm going to approve that, enter my comment. It's okay to send a new item. As I'm doing that, it's going to complete the RMA, which I can get to from the workflow log. And as I had filtered my log, I'm going to clear my filter and look at my RA21. So as you can see, I could filter by just RA21 here to see exactly what's happened to that array. So we now have a complete log of what has actually happened to our array in the system. It was created by Sue, and because it wasn't marked complete the first time around, workflow wasn't required. When Sue made the array complete, when the item came back, it went to the stage of waiting for inspection. Then the QA user did the inspection and it got assigned to accounts, and Steve in accounts did the final approval. First time around, because I clicked cancel and did complete the approval, it stayed in that waiting step. So I can see that Steve first looked at it and then, a few minutes later or the next day actually finalized the approval. And from here I can also drill down to my array, and I can see the notes that Steve has added. And if I look at the comments, I can see the inspection comment. We've configured the workflow to save the inspection comment here against the array. And again, this is configuration that you can do yourself in the workflow template. In this example, we've seen how we can use notes and document management link around RMA to track details about the original invoice, about the customer, about the return process itself, as well as configure extender workflow to approve the completion of the RMA. RMA helps manage your returns efficiently when you add Info Explorer to provide insights into your returns rate by customer and items. You add Extender to enforce business rules validation, to develop a workflow around your array. You can also use Extender to automate the printing of the array so that the return instructions and the other documents created by RA are automatically saved with the right name in the customer folder. You really have a lot of flexibility in how you can process your returns to increase transparency and improve customer experience. In our example, we had configured the workflow to have 2 levels, but it is your choice how you configure it for your business requirements and also for different types of returns. You can notify users by email, and there are many examples in the workflow video on the Orchid website demonstrating using emails. You also have options to approve returns outside of the Sage 300 desktop using Remote Action Service and Workflow Anywhere, the mobile app. So this is the end of our presentation for today. Thank you very much for your time. You can look at the Orchid website for more information on RMA and the other Orchid modules that we have reviewed today. And now we are ready for questions.